They recorded 4 voices in the room. But when they played it back, there was a 5th voice answering their questions. And it knew what would happen next. The first knock came exactly 7 days after the funeral. It was 2:17 in the morning when the sound echoed through the quiet house. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. Not loud. Not frantic. Just firm enough to wake the Martins from sleep. At first, Daniel Martin assumed it was a dream. He lay still, listening, waiting for another sound. His wife, Claire, shifted beside him. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Before he could answer, the knock came again. Same rhythm. Same patience. Daniel checked the time on his phone. 2:17 a.m. Their street was usually silent at night. A neat row of suburban homes, elderly couples, families with young kids. Nothing ever happened there. That was one of the reasons they'd moved in. Daniel pulled on a robe and walked down the hallway. As he reached the living room, a voice floated through the door. "Daniel, it's me." He froze. The voice was calm, familiar, soft in the way it always had been. It sounded exactly like Margaret Hensley. Margaret had lived across the street for almost 30 years. She was the kind of neighbor who baked too much bread and gave it away, who remembered birthdays, who waved every morning from her porch. She had died suddenly of a stroke the week before. The entire street had attended her burial. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He told himself someone was playing a cruel joke. Grief made people hear things. That was all. He stepped closer to the door but didn't open it. "Who is this?" he called. There was a pause. Then a sigh, almost disappointed. "Daniel, please. I forgot my key. It's cold out here." Claire appeared behind him, pale and shaking. She mouthed, "That's her voice." The doorknob rattled gently as if tested by a polite hand. Daniel backed away. "I think you should go," he said louder now. "Whoever you are." Silence followed. Then footsteps, slow, retreating, down the porch steps. When Daniel finally opened the door, the porch was empty. No one stood on the sidewalk. No car. No movement. Across the street, Margaret's house was dark and boarded up, a sold sign staked into the lawn. They didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, Daniel convinced himself it was a prank. Teenagers, maybe. Someone with a cruel sense of humor. He installed a porch light and checked the locks twice before bed. At 2:17 the following morning, the knocking returned. This time Claire heard the voice first. "Claire dear, I need help." She sat straight up in bed, tears already forming. "That's impossible," she whispered. The voice outside continued, gentle and patient, as if it knew they were listening. "I don't want to wake the whole street. Just open the door." Daniel grabbed his phone and opened the camera app. He walked toward the front door again, hands trembling. When the knocking came a third time, he flung the door open, phone raised. No one stood there. But the recording captured something else. The sound of knocking, clear as day. And beneath it, a faint voice speaking from inches away. "Why won't you look at me?" Daniel deleted the video without telling Claire. On the third night, they called the police before going to bed. 2 officers parked across the street, lights off, watching the house. Daniel and Claire sat on the couch, every lamp turned on, waiting for the time to pass. At 2:16 a.m. nothing happened. At 2:17 the knock came anyway. The officers heard it too. One of them stepped onto the porch, flashlight sweeping the area. Nothing. No footprints. No one hiding nearby. Then the officer's radio crackled. "Unit 3, a dispatcher said, confused. "Who just requested access to the Hensley residence?" The officer frowned. "The Hensley house is vacant." There was a pause on the line. "I'm getting an open door alert," the dispatcher replied. Front door. Across the street, Margaret's front door slowly creaked open. The officer turned, flashlight beam shaking. Inside the dark house, a light flicked on in the living room. And from within, A familiar voice drifted out into the night. "Daniel, I can see you now." The officers left shortly after. They told the Martins there was nothing they could do. No evidence of a person. No sign of forced entry. They suggested stress, grief, sleep disturbances. The knocking continued every night after that. Always at 2:17. Sometimes the voice begged. Sometimes it sounded annoyed. Once it sounded angry. On the 6th night it said something different. "Daniel, I don't like standing out here alone." That was when Claire broke down. She packed a bag and told Daniel she was going to stay with her sister. She begged him to come with her. Daniel said he would, after one more night. He wanted answers. Proof. Something real. At 2:16 a.m., Daniel sat in the dark living room, recording audio on his phone, eyes locked on the front door. The knock came right on time. Before the voice could speak, Daniel shouted, "Why are you here?" There was a long pause. Then the voice softened. "Because you never said goodbye." The porch light flickered on by itself. Daniel opened the door. Margaret stood there, exactly as she had in life. Same coat. Same gentle smile. Even the faint lavender scent she always wore. But her eyes were wrong. They were filled with soil. "You came," she said warmly. "I was starting to think you couldn't hear me anymore." Daniel tried to scream. Nothing came out. Margaret stepped forward, her shoes leaving no sound on the wood. "They buried me too early," she continued, voice trembling now. "I knocked and knocked, Daniel. Just like this." Her hand lifted and knocked softly against his chest. "When no one came, I learned how to knock louder." Daniel was found the next morning standing in Margaret's living room, alone, staring at the open front door. Across the street, his own house was dark. Claire never heard knocking again. But the new family that moved into the Martins' home did. Every night at 2:17. 3 slow knocks. And a voice outside that sounds exactly like Daniel, asking to be let back in. They moved into the neighborhood in early spring, the kind of place real estate listings describe as peaceful and family-friendly. The houses were modest but well-kept, lawns trimmed, swing sets anchored into soft soil. Tall trees lined both sides of the street, their branches arching overhead like a tunnel. At night, the leaves whispered constantly even when there was no wind. For the first few weeks nothing felt wrong. Parents waved from driveways. Children rode bikes in loose packs until the streetlights flicked on. It was the kind of neighborhood where people felt safe letting their kids play outside without hovering nearby. That's why no one noticed anything unusual at first. It began with a 6-year-old girl named Lily who lived 3 houses down. One afternoon, while her mother watered the lawn, Lily stopped mid-sentence and raised her arm, pointing toward the trees at the far end of the street. Her mother glanced up casually. "What is it?" Lily didn't answer right away. Her face had gone strangely still. "The man," she said. "What man?" "The one in the trees." Her mother followed the line of her finger. There was nothing there, just a thick cluster of trunks and shadows where the street curved out of sight. "Honey, there's no one there." Lily frowned, not scared, just confused. "Yes, there is. He's waving." Her mother laughed it off, assuming it was imagination. Kids saw things. Invisible friends. Monsters that disappeared the moment an adult looked. By the next day, Lily had stopped mentioning it. Then another child did. A boy named Aaron, age 8, was walking home from school with his older sister when he suddenly stopped and stepped closer to her. "Do you see him?" he asked quietly. "See who?" "The man up there." He pointed toward the trees behind the houses, where the branches grew thick and low. His sister squinted. "There's nobody there." Aaron shook his head. "He's always there. He just watches." That night, their mother overheard Aaron telling their father about the man. How he wore dark clothes. How he stood between the trees and never came closer. How he smiled but not with his eyes. Their father told him to stop making things up before bed. Within a week, 5 different children on the street had described the same thing. None of the adults realized that part at first. What made them uneasy was how suddenly the kids stopped playing near the trees. They stayed close to their houses now. Some refused to go outside at all. Parents noticed clinginess, nightmares, sudden bedwetting. One child screamed when the wind rustled the branches too loudly. Finally, during a weekend barbecue, the adults compared notes. "It's probably some game they're playing," one neighbor suggested. But the descriptions didn't sound like a game. Every child independently described the same man. Tall, thin, standing just inside the tree line. His face pale, stretched tight like he'd forgotten how to wear it properly. His arms hung too long at his sides. Sometimes he lifted one hand slowly and waved. Always smiling. Never blinking. One mother asked her son why the man scared him so much. He thought about it for a long time before answering. "Because he doesn't move like people," he said. "He moves like he's trying to remember how." That was the moment the adults stopped laughing. A few fathers walked down to the trees together that evening. They searched between trunks, checked behind brush, even circled around to the empty lot beyond the street. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of anyone sleeping rough. No disturbed ground. The kids watched from their porches, silent. The man didn't appear that night. For 2 days things felt normal again. Then Lily pointed at the trees during breakfast and said, "He's closer." That night, a security camera at the edge of the street recorded something strange. At exactly 2:11 a.m., the branches at the far end of the road shifted. Not with wind, but as if something passed through them slowly. The footage was grainy, black and white. No clear figure. Just shadows bending where they shouldn't. The next morning, one of the kids refused to leave his room. "He was standing outside my window," he whispered. "He doesn't like when we talk about him." That was when someone remembered the house at the end of the street. The one half hidden by trees. It had been empty since before any of them moved in. No for sale sign. No lights. No mailbox. An older neighbor, Mrs. Klein, had lived there the longest. When asked about it, she hesitated. "There used to be a man who lived there," she said slowly. Quiet. Kept to himself. "What happened to him?" Mrs. Klein looked toward the trees. "He went missing. Years ago, the man had been reported lost after going for a walk in the woods behind his house. Search teams found nothing. No body. No trail. Eventually, people stopped asking questions. The children had started pointing at the trees the same week new families moved in. The same week laughter returned to the street. That night the kids all woke up screaming. Parents rushed into hallways and bedrooms to find their children sitting upright, pointing at windows, at walls, at doors. "He's inside now," one of them cried. The police were called. They searched the neighborhood thoroughly. Again they found nothing. But one officer noticed something strange while reviewing the old missing person report. The man who disappeared had a photo attached. Tall, thin, dark clothes. A smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The next day the trees at the end of the street were cut down. Parents didn't argue about it. They paid whatever it cost. As the final trunk fell, several children began to cry. Not in fear. In relief. For weeks afterward, the nightmares stopped. The kids played outside again. The street felt lighter, quieter. Until one afternoon, Lily stopped mid-step and pointed at the empty sky above the houses. Her mother's heart sank. "What is it?" she asked. Lily's eyes followed something moving slowly, deliberately. "He's not mad," she said softly. "He just doesn't know where to stand anymore." That night, for the first time, the parents noticed something they'd been too distracted to see before. All along the street, between houses, behind fences, beside bedroom windows, new shadows had formed. Not shaped like trees. Shaped like people. Standing perfectly still. Watching. The bus route was known among drivers as the quiet one. After midnight, It cut through sleeping neighborhoods, empty intersections, and long stretches of road where streetlights flickered like they were deciding whether to stay awake. Most nights, it carried no more than 2 or 3 passengers at a time. Night shift workers, insomniacs, or people with nowhere else to be. The driver that night was a man named Victor Hale. He'd been driving city buses for almost 20 years, long enough to stop fearing the silence. He knew every stop by muscle memory, every turn by instinct. He liked the late shift because nothing ever happened. That changed on a cold Thursday in late October. Victor began his route at 11:48 p.m., right on time. The bus was empty when he pulled out of the terminal, just the low hum of the engine and the soft glow of fluorescent lights reflecting off the windows. The city felt drained of life, like it was holding its breath. At the 4th stop, someone boarded. She was a woman in her early 30s, maybe late 20s. Pale but not sickly. Just tired. She wore a dark coat that looked too thin for the weather and carried no bag, no purse, nothing at all. She didn't look at Victor when she stepped on, just nodded slightly and walked toward the middle of the bus. Victor noticed her because she didn't swipe a card or drop any cash. "Ma'am," he called out, not unkindly. "Fare." She stopped, turned slowly and looked at him. Her eyes were dark and unfocused, like she was concentrating on remembering something. "Oh," she said softly. "I'm getting off soon." Victor frowned. "Still need to pay." She hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket. Her hand came out empty. She stared at it for a moment, confused, before looking back at him. "I always get off at Willow Bend," she said. Her voice wasn't threatening. It wasn't eerie. It was calm, too calm. Victor sighed. It was late and he didn't feel like arguing. "Just take a seat," he muttered. "Don't make a habit of it." She nodded again as if relieved and sat down on the right side of the bus, 3rd row from the back. The ride continued in silence. At the next 2 stops, no one got on. No one got off. Victor glanced in the mirror occasionally, just to confirm she was still there. Each time she sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. She never looked out the window. Never checked a phone. Never shifted in her seat. When the bus turned onto Old Ridge Road, the temperature seemed to drop. Victor noticed because the windows fogged slightly, even though the heater was running. Old Ridge was a narrow stretch of road with no sidewalks and only one bus stop, Willow Bend. The stop was barely more than a sign planted into cracked concrete, surrounded by trees that leaned inward like they were listening. Victor slowed the bus as he approached. Before he could pull fully to the curb, the woman stood up. "This is me," she said. Her voice carried oddly in the empty bus. Victor nodded and opened the doors. The bus hissed softly as they parted. Cold air rushed in. She stepped down onto the pavement, then paused. "Thank you," she said. Victor watched her walk away toward the trees, her figure shrinking as the darkness swallowed her up. He waited a few seconds, then closed the doors and pulled back onto the road. In his mirror, the stop was empty again. The rest of the route passed without incident. By the time Victor returned to the terminal, it was nearly 2 a.m. He filled out his paperwork, stretched his back, and went home. By morning, he'd almost forgotten about the woman entirely. Almost. 3 nights later, Victor was back on the same route. Same start time. Same silence. When he reached the Willow Bend stretch, his chest tightened, not because he saw her but because he didn't. Something felt wrong. As he slowed near the stop, his headlights caught something on the side of the road. A small roadside memorial, wilted flowers, a stuffed animal bleached by weather, and a white wooden cross with a name carved into it. Victor hadn't noticed it before. He pulled the bus to a stop, opened the doors and stared at the memorial. For reasons he couldn't explain, he stepped down from the bus and walked closer. The name on the cross was Elena Marrow. Below it was a date. 7 years ago. Victor stood there longer than he should have. When he finally got back on the bus, his hands were shaking. The next morning he asked the dispatcher about it. "That memorial on Old Ridge," he said casually. What happened there? The dispatcher didn't look up from his computer. Hit and run, he said. Woman got clipped by a speeding car late at night. Died on scene. Victor swallowed. Do you know her name? The dispatcher paused, then glanced at him. Why? I just thought I recognized it. Elena Marrow, the dispatcher said. Happened years before you started driving nights. Victor didn't respond. That night he drove the route again. And again at the fourth stop someone boarded. It was her. Same coat. Same empty hands. Same quiet nod as she stepped onto the bus. Victor's breath caught in his throat. She sat in the same seat. He didn't say a word. The bus moved forward, tires whispering against the asphalt. Victor's heart pounded so loudly he was sure she could hear it. Every glance in the mirror confirmed she was still there, still motionless. When they reached Old Ridge Road, Victor slowed earlier than usual. She stood up. This is me, she said. Victor gripped the steering wheel. Ma'am, he managed. Do you live out there? She looked at him, really looked at him this time. I never made it home, she said. The bus doors opened on their own. She stepped down, then turned back. They don't see me, she added. Not unless I ride. Victor watched her disappear into the trees again. That was the last night Victor ever drove that route. He transferred shifts the next morning and refused to explain why. Months later, a new driver was assigned to the late route. Within a week, the driver reported something unusual. A woman boarding without paying. Getting off at Willow Bend. Always thanking the driver. And every time the bus passed that memorial, the onboard cameras glitched. Just for a moment, showing an empty bus where someone should have been sitting. Except for one frame. In that frame, the seat was occupied. And the woman was staring directly into the camera. The first thing Daniel noticed was that his brother didn't smell like the night. Marcus had gone out just after sunset, jacket on, keys jangling, promising he'd be back late. When he returned a little after midnight, Daniel was still awake on the couch, half watching a muted TV. Marcus stepped inside quietly and locked the door behind him with unusual care. Daniel looked up and felt a small, unplaceable unease. Marcus's clothes were clean. Too clean. No scent of cold air, no sweat, no bar smoke, no rain. It was as if he'd never been outside at all. You're back early, Daniel said. Marcus paused, then smiled. It was the right smile. Same crooked edge, same dimple, but it arrived a fraction too late. Plans changed, Marcus said. His voice was right. His face was right. But something about the way he stood in the doorway felt staged. Like he was remembering how to be himself. They talked for a few minutes. Small things. Where he'd been. Who he'd seen. Marcus answered easily, but each response felt rehearsed, like lines practiced ahead of time. He kept rubbing his hands together, palms dry, fingers twitching. When Daniel mentioned the bar Marcus always went to on Fridays, his brother blinked. Oh, yeah. That place, he said as if hearing the name for the first time. Later that night, Daniel heard Marcus moving around in his room. Not pacing, measured steps. Slow. Back and forth, as if counting. The next morning, Marcus was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table in the dark. He hadn't turned on the lights. He didn't react when Daniel entered, just stared at his reflection in the black window. You okay? Daniel asked. Marcus turned. Again that delayed smile. Did I wake you? He asked. No. You're just up early. Marcus nodded like he was filing that information away. Over the next 2 days, the wrongness deepened. Marcus forgot things he shouldn't have. How he took his coffee, the neighbor's dog he'd known for years, the scar on Daniel's hand they'd joked about since childhood. Sometimes he watched Daniel with intense focus like he was studying him. Other times he avoided mirrors entirely. On the third night, Daniel woke to the sound of the front door opening. He checked the time. 2:14 a.m. Marcus stood in the doorway, one hand on the knob, frozen mid-step. He was fully dressed. "Where are you going?" Daniel whispered. Marcus turned slowly. "I heard something," he said. "Outside." Daniel followed him into the hall. The house was silent. No footsteps. No voices. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. "There's nothing out there," Daniel said. Marcus stared at the door for a long moment, then locked it. This time he added the deadbolt. Then the chain. "I don't think it likes closed doors," he said quietly. Daniel laughed, a nervous sound meant to break the tension. "What?" Marcus blinked as if waking from a thought. "Nothing." The breaking point came the following afternoon. Daniel was at work when he received a call from the police. They asked if he was Marcus's brother. They asked if Marcus was home. Confused, Daniel said yes. Of course he was. There was a pause on the line. "Sir," the officer said carefully, "we need you to listen to what I'm about to say." According to their records, and according to multiple witnesses, Marcus had never left the house on Friday night. The officer explained that a neighbor had reported seeing someone who looked exactly like Marcus wandering the street around midnight, barefoot, disoriented. When approached, the man ran. Surveillance footage showed him moving strangely, jerky, uneven, before disappearing behind the house. The police had come by that night. They'd knocked. No one answered. But their body cam showed something else. A figure standing in the upstairs window, watching them. Daniel drove home shaking. When he pulled into the driveway, Marcus was sitting on the porch steps, hands folded, waiting. "You talked to them?" Marcus said. Daniel stopped short. "How did you?" "They don't understand," Marcus continued calmly. "They think I'm you. Or him. Or something simple." "Marcus," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "Where were you Friday night?" Marcus tilted his head. "I was here." "No," Daniel said. "You left. I saw you." Marcus's eyes darkened just for a moment. "No," he repeated. "Something else did." Inside, the house felt colder than it should have. The air was stale, unmoving. Marcus stood in the center of the living room, suddenly tense. "It doesn't like when you talk about it," he said. "Talk about what?" Marcus looked at the ceiling. At the corners of the room. At the spaces between things. "When I came back," he said slowly, "it was already here." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "Already here where?" "In me." Silence pressed in from all sides. Marcus explained in fragments. How he'd gone to the bathroom at the bar. How the lights flickered. How the mirror didn't show his reflection right away. How something behind the glass smiled first. He said it followed him home, step for step, wearing him like a coat that didn't quite fit. "I think it thought I wouldn't notice," Marcus whispered. "But I can feel it, learning." A loud knock slammed against the front door. Both of them jumped. "Police," a voice called. "We need you to open the door." Marcus grabbed Daniel's arm, his grip ice cold. "If they see me," he said, panicked now, "it'll know how to leave." The knock came again, harder. Daniel looked at his brother, at the familiar face, the wrong eyes, the tremor beneath his skin. "What do I do?" Daniel whispered. Marcus's expression twisted with fear and something else. Relief. "Lock me in," he said. "Don't let it out." The knocking turned into pounding. Daniel backed away, heart racing. "Daniel," Marcus begged. "Please." The lights flickered. For a split second, Marcus's shadow moved the wrong way. Daniel ran. He bolted out the back door, straight into the arms of the police. They rushed past him, guns drawn, shouting commands. From the yard, Daniel heard Marcus scream. Then stop. The officers came out minutes later. Their faces were pale. They said the house was empty. No signs of a struggle. No Marcus. Only the front door wide open. Weeks later, Daniel moved out. But sometimes late at night, he hears footsteps upstairs in the new place. Slow. Measured. Back and forth. And once, when he caught his reflection in the dark window, he could have sworn It smiled before he did. Everyone on Holloway Street agreed on one thing: the old Mercer house was empty. It had been empty for nearly 10 years, ever since the last owner died alone inside and the city boarded it up. No new family ever moved in. No realtor sign ever appeared. The grass grew knee-high. The porch sagged. The windows stayed dark. Until they didn't. It started quietly. One neighbor noticed a soft yellow glow in the upstairs bedroom around midnight. Another saw the kitchen lit up the next night. Not flickering. Not flashing. Just on. Steady. Patient. At first people blamed squatters. Teenagers. Someone running an extension cord from another property. But there was a problem with that explanation. There hadn't been electricity in that house for years. The city had shut it off after the owner's death. The meter had been removed entirely. Everyone on the block knew that. And yet, every night, a different room lit up. It became routine. After dinner, neighbors would glance toward the Mercer house the way you check the time without thinking. Some nights it was the living room. Other nights, the upstairs hall. Sometimes multiple rooms at once, glowing like someone had just come home and forgotten to turn the lights off. But no one ever saw anyone enter. No doors opened. No footsteps. No shadows crossing the windows. Just light. People called the city. They called the power company. Inspectors came during the day, walked around with clipboards and confirmed what everyone already knew. No active electrical service. No generator. No wiring connected to the grid. At night, the lights came back anyway. Eventually, curiosity turned into unease. The glow wasn't bright like modern bulbs. It was duller. Older. Almost warm. Like lamps from another time. One woman said the light seemed to pulse just slightly as if breathing. That was when Daniel Kessler decided to go inside. Daniel lived across the street and worked construction. He was practical, calm, the kind of person who didn't believe in stories. He told his wife the whole thing was probably kids messing around or some weird reflection effect. Still, he volunteered to check it out, if only to put everyone at ease. On a Thursday evening just after sunset, Daniel crossed the street with a flashlight and a crowbar. A few neighbors watched from their porches, pretending not to care. The front door was still boarded, but one of the side windows had a loose panel. Daniel pried it open and climbed inside. The smell hit him first. Stale air, damp wood, something metallic underneath it all. His flashlight beam cut through the dark, landing on furniture still covered in sheets. The house hadn't been stripped. It had been abandoned midlife. A coat still hung on a hook by the door. A calendar was frozen on the month the owner died. Daniel moved room to room, calling out, his voice echoing too loudly. No one answered. He checked the breaker box in the basement. It was empty. Not tripped. Empty. The entire panel had been removed years ago. No electricity. No power. Nothing that could explain what everyone had been seeing. Then the light came on. Daniel froze. It wasn't sudden. It didn't click or buzz. The room simply filled. A soft amber glow seeped into the walls themselves, like the house was remembering how to be lit. The flashlight beam became unnecessary. The wallpaper glowed faintly, evenly, as though painted with moonlight. Daniel whispered something, maybe his wife's name, and backed away slowly. That was when he noticed the handprints. They appeared along the hallway wall, one by one, emerging as darker shapes against the glowing surface. Small hands. Adult hands. Pressed flat as if someone had leaned there and never moved again. Daniel ran. He burst out of the house, tripped down the porch steps, and didn't stop until he was back across the street, shaking so badly he couldn't hold his flashlight. The neighbors demanded answers. Daniel couldn't give them. He just kept saying the same thing. There are no lights. The walls are the lights. The city condemned the house the next morning. A historical inspector was brought in, digging through old permits and records. What they found explained part of it, but not all. The Mercer house had once belonged to a clockmaker in the 1940s. He'd done delicate work late into the night using luminous paint, radium-based, to mark dials so they could be read in the dark. Over time he'd used it everywhere. On the walls. Along door frames. Even mixed into regular paint when he ran out. Radium glows faintly. More so at night. It was dangerous. Illegal. And according to the files, the man and his family had died of unknown illnesses before the house was sealed. The city concluded the glow was chemical. A reaction. Nothing supernatural. They boarded the windows more securely. Posted warnings. Told the neighbors the issue was solved. For a while it seemed like it was. Then one night the lights came back on. Only this time they weren't in different rooms. They were all on at once. Every window glowed. Every room illuminated. The house shone brighter than it ever had before. And the neighbors could see silhouettes. Dozens of them. Standing shoulder to shoulder behind the windows, perfectly still. Not moving. Not blinking. Just watching. When police arrived, the glow vanished. The house went dark again, empty and silent. No one ever went back inside. The Mercer house still stands on Holloway Street, sealed and decaying. And some nights, when the block is quiet and no one is looking directly at it, the windows light up again, not bright enough to be seen head-on. Only out of the corner of your eye. As if the house knows when it's being watched, and prefers when it isn't. The house had always been quiet in a way that felt intentional, like it was holding its breath. It sat at the end of a narrow street where trees leaned inward, their branches brushing the roof when the wind picked up. Nothing about it looked threatening. It was just old. Old walls, old pipes, and a basement that smelled faintly of damp concrete and dust no matter how often it was cleaned. The family had lived there for nearly 6 years without incident. Until the night the voice called from below. It happened on a weekday evening, sometime after dinner. The father, Daniel, was standing in the kitchen with his daughter, Claire, helping her rinse dishes. The house was calm, the television murmuring softly in the living room. His wife was upstairs folding laundry. Nothing was out of place. That's why the voice stood out immediately. Daniel. It came from the basement. Not loud. Not urgent. Just clear enough to be heard. Claire froze with a plate still dripping in her hands. Daniel stopped moving altogether. They both heard it at the same time and they both recognized it instantly. It sounded exactly like Daniel. Same pitch. Same tired softness he used when calling for someone casually. The way he said his own name without thinking. Claire slowly looked up at her father. He was already staring at the basement door, his face drained of color. That wasn't funny, she said, forcing a weak laugh. Daniel didn't respond. A few seconds passed. The house settled. Pipes ticked softly. The television laughed in the background. Then the voice came again. Daniel, can you come down here? This time Claire felt her stomach twist. The voice wasn't distorted or echoing. It didn't sound hollow or ghostly. It sounded present. Close. Like someone standing at the bottom of the stairs. Daniel swallowed hard. Oh, I'm right here, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire's hands began to shake. Dad, she said, you're standing next to me? They both knew that. The basement door creaked as Daniel reached for the handle. Claire grabbed his arm without thinking. Don't, she said. Please don't. I just need to check, he replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Maybe your mom? Before he could finish, his wife's voice called from upstairs. Daniel? Did you say something? Daniel's head snapped toward the staircase leading up. No, he called back. Stay up there. There was a pause. Then the basement voice spoke again. Why are you ignoring me? This time it sounded irritated. Claire let go of her father and stepped backward. Dad, she whispered, it knows your voice. Daniel nodded slowly as if the realization had finally settled in. He didn't answer the voice. Neither did Claire. They stood there holding their breath, listening. For several seconds nothing happened. Then came footsteps. They were faint but unmistakable. Slow steps ascending the basement stairs one at a time. Each step creaked in a way the house always had. Familiar sounds copied perfectly. The footsteps stopped just behind the closed door. "Daniel," the voice said softly, "closer now. I'm tired of waiting." Claire began to cry quietly. Daniel placed himself between her and the door, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Who are you?" he asked. There was a pause. Then the voice answered in his own tone, calm and confused. "What do you mean?" "It's me." The doorknob turned. Daniel lunged forward and slammed his shoulder against the door, holding it shut with his weight. The knob rattled violently on the other side. The voice changed then, not in pitch but in emotion. Anger crept in. "You're making this difficult," it said. Upstairs, Daniel's wife screamed. Heavy footsteps thundered above as she ran toward the stairs. Daniel shouted for her to stay back, but it was too late. She was already descending, fear etched across her face. "What's going on?" she cried. The basement door shook again. Daniel looked at his wife and daughter, then back at the door. "Call the police," he said. "Now." The rattling stopped. Silence swallowed the house. The police arrived within minutes, though it felt much longer to the family. Officers searched the basement thoroughly. Every corner. Every storage room. There was no one there. No forced entry. No signs of a struggle. Just dust. Old boxes. And a staircase that led nowhere. They chalked it up to stress. Maybe a prank. Maybe an auditory hallucination. But none of those explanations sat right with anyone who had heard that voice. The family didn't sleep that night. Neither did the house. Over the next week, strange things continued. Daniel would hear himself coughing from empty rooms. Claire heard her own voice whispering her name when she was home alone. Always subtle. Always brief. Always identical. They started avoiding the basement entirely. Then one evening, Daniel stayed late at work. Claire and her mother were upstairs watching television when they heard his voice call from the basement again. "I'm home." Claire's blood ran cold. Her mother stood up slowly. "That's your father?" she said. Claire shook her head. "No," she whispered. "He's not." The basement door was already open. Footsteps began climbing the stairs. When Daniel arrived home an hour later, he found the house empty. No signs of struggle. No broken furniture. Just the television still playing softly in the upstairs bedroom. And in the basement, carved faintly into the concrete wall near the stairs, were 3 names. Daniel's, his wife's, and Claire's, written in handwriting that matched his own perfectly. The family first noticed him on a quiet Tuesday night. It was just after 9, the kind of hour when the street was empty except for the occasional passing car. From the kitchen window, Sarah, the mother, thought she saw a man standing across the street. At first, she assumed it was a neighbor walking home late or maybe someone taking the trash out. But as she blinked, he didn't move. He just stood there. She called out to her husband, Mark, but by the time he came to the window, the man was gone. They shrugged it off, chalking it up to shadows or tired eyes. Then it happened again the next night. Same street, same time, same figure. He was wearing a dark coat, his face obscured by shadows, hands at his sides, unmoving. It was unsettling, but still they told themselves it was coincidence. By the 3rd night, their 10-year-old daughter Lily whispered from her bedroom, "Mom, he's back. He's right there again." Sarah peeked out the window and froze. The man stood perfectly still, only 20 feet from the curb, staring directly at their house. Not at them, not moving, just watching. Her stomach sank. Mark tried to rationalize it. "Maybe someone's waiting for a ride or a friend," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. They called the police the next night. An officer arrived, flashlight in hand, and combed the quiet street. There was no one there. No footprints, no parked cars, No evidence of anyone hiding. The officer gave a polite nod and left, promising to patrol if anything came up. That night and every night after, the man returned. Sometimes he was closer to the corner, sometimes just across the street. Always still. Always watching. And always, as soon as the police or neighbors arrived, he disappeared. It started to affect the family. Sarah stopped sleeping, constantly checking the windows. Mark found himself pacing late at night, staring out from the living room, hoping not to see him. Lily refused to go outside after dark, clutching her favorite stuffed animal, whispering that he never blinks. They tried documenting it. Phones, cameras, anything. And that's when it got even stranger. In every photo the man appeared. In every frame. Perfectly still. But when they ran outside immediately after snapping the pictures, nothing. Just empty pavement. The images were undeniable proof, yet reality contradicted them. Weeks passed. The tension gnawed at the family. Friends and neighbors offered little help, mostly dismissing it as stress or imagination. But then the small-town rumor mill began to churn. Others had seen him too. Walking home from the grocery store, a mail carrier claimed a man stood in the same spot, silent, watching houses up and down the block. But whenever anyone tried to approach, he vanished. The strangest thing was that nobody could describe his face. Every attempt to focus on him was like trying to remember a dream. Only his outline, dark coat, the way he stood, motionless, eternal, remained in memory. One evening, Mark decided to confront it. He waited on the porch, phone in hand, ready to record. The man appeared as if on cue just across the street. Mark's heart pounded. He whispered, "Why are you here?" The man didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe, it seemed. Then, in a voice that was low, calm, and hollow, he spoke. "I live here." Mark froze. What do you mean?" "I've always lived here," the man said. "Even before you." Mark's phone slipped from his hands. He scrambled to the ground to pick it up, and when he looked up, the man was gone. Just empty street, quiet night. Panicked, the family decided to check the property records, thinking maybe there had been some forgotten history or previous tenant. The house had been built 50 years ago, a small, ordinary home. But what they found made their blood run cold. The plot had one previous owner. A man who had died there, alone in that very living room 40 years earlier. No family. No obituary. And according to police reports, he was known to wander outside his home at night, standing silently watching until neighbors called the police, and the calls were met with nothing. The family moved. They sold the house to someone else. But every photograph they took inside the house, their last night there, captured something impossible. The man. Standing silently in the corner of every frame, hands at his sides, watching them. No one ever saw him again. Except in the pictures. When Megan and Tyler moved into the old brick apartment on Hollow Street, they thought they had finally found the perfect place. It was a quiet building, tucked between an empty lot and a convenience store, with tall windows that let in just enough light to feel cozy. The rent was low, almost suspiciously so, but the landlord assured them it had been recently renovated. Everything looked fine. Or so they thought. The first few nights were normal. Megan would fall asleep to the sound of rain tapping against the windows, and Tyler would stay up reading in the living room, occasionally glancing at the empty hallway outside their apartment door. But about a week in, Megan started noticing a strange draft in the apartment. An icy, unnatural wind that seemed to come from nowhere. "It's probably just the old vents," Tyler said when she mentioned it. "This building is old. Cold air gets in sometimes." But Megan knew it wasn't the vents. The draft felt targeted, like it was coming from a specific spot along the far wall in their bedroom, one wall that had always seemed off. One evening after they had eaten dinner and settled in, Megan leaned against the wall while scrolling through her phone, and she noticed it, a faint outline in the paint, almost like a seam. She traced it with her fingertips, and when she pressed firmly, the wall gave way slightly. Tyler noticed it too. "What is that?" he muttered, crouching down. He ran his hand along the edge and felt a cold metal handle, hidden behind the wallpaper. "It's a door," Megan whispered. They looked at each other, unsure whether to be excited or scared. Slowly, Tyler pulled it open. A cloud of stale, musty air hit them immediately, carrying the faint smell of decay. Beyond the door was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. They grabbed their phones, turning on the flashlights, and carefully descended. The staircase ended at a small, windowless room. Megan's breath caught. The space was packed from floor to ceiling with furniture, boxes, and objects that looked decades old. But the strangest thing wasn't the clutter, it was the objects themselves. A child's broken toy, a woman's faded scarf, a pair of men's shoes, all arranged neatly, almost as if someone had left them there intentionally. On the walls there were photographs taped up, portraits of people, smiling, waving, living. But as Megan examined them more closely, a cold shiver ran down her spine. Many of the faces were familiar. They recognized some of the people as former tenants, residents who had vanished without explanation over the years. Tyler tried to laugh it off. Maybe it's a storage room the landlord forgot about. Maybe he just kept their stuff. But Megan shook her head. "Look at this." She held up a journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. Scribbled inside were entries describing daily life in the apartment. The dates went back decades. But then, the last entry stopped abruptly mid-sentence, as if whoever had written them had been interrupted. A sudden noise made them both freeze. A soft creak, like a chair being moved, came from the corner of the room. Their flashlights swung toward it and Tyler's stomach dropped. There was nothing there, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. "We should leave," Megan whispered. Tyler nodded and they started back up the stairs. But when they reached the top, the door slammed shut behind them. They tried to pull it open, but it was stuck, immovable. Megan banged on it, shouting for help. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door gave way. They stumbled back into the apartment, gasping for air. Their hands shook so violently they could barely turn on the lights. That night, they slept fitfully, both dreaming of the hidden room. And when morning came, Tyler went to check something. A small box they had moved into the living room. Inside was a single photograph. It was of them, Megan and Tyler, smiling in the apartment. But in the background of the photo, in the shadows of the far wall, something stood. A figure, pale and still, watching them. They never spoke of the room again. But over the next few weeks, the draft returned, stronger than before. Sometimes at night, Megan would wake to find objects in the apartment subtly moved. A chair slightly shifted, a picture frame tilted, even small items they were sure they had put away. And then one evening, Tyler noticed something even more disturbing. A small, faded scarf, the same one they had seen in the hidden room, appeared on their bedroom chair. They hadn't bought it. They hadn't touched it. Megan's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "It followed us." From that day forward, the apartment never felt like theirs. Every shadow seemed heavier, every corner darker. The objects, the photographs, the belongings of the people who had disappeared, they were no longer trapped below. They were here among the living, waiting. And Megan and Tyler understood, with a sinking realization, that some rooms are never truly empty. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Everyone in the family had known it would be hard when Eleanor passed. She had lived a long life, 79 years, and yet when the call came in the early hours, it felt unreal. Her house had grown quiet, the garden overgrown, the little bell above the front door silent for the first time in decades. They held her funeral on a crisp Tuesday morning, and after the ceremony, the family slowly returned to their homes, still carrying the hollow ache of absence. It was 2 days later that the first voicemail arrived. Her granddaughter, Anna, had been scrolling through her messages when she noticed an unfamiliar number. She clicked play expecting maybe a telemarketer. Instead, there was a faint static, and then a voice. Eleanor's voice. "Anna, don't forget the cabinet," it whispered. Anna froze. Her grandmother had never used the phrase "the cabinet" before. But then she remembered. Her grandmother had always been particular about that old oak cabinet in the living room, the one where she kept family letters, photographs, and little trinkets. Anna shrugged it off at first. Maybe it was some trick, someone imitating her voice. But the calls kept coming. At first they were short. One word, a single sentence. But soon the voicemails became longer. Eleanor's voice, unmistakable, recounting things she could not have known anyone else knew. Secrets from Anna's childhood. Conversations that had only happened in whispers at night. "You never liked him, did you?" the voice asked once. Anna's pulse quickened. Only Eleanor had ever said that. She was the only one who had noticed Anna's silent resentment toward a distant cousin who visited every summer. And it wasn't just Anna. Her brother, David, began getting calls too. At first he laughed nervously when he played them. Then, after hearing the third message, he stopped joking. "Check the attic." "Hurry," Eleanor's voice urged. David hadn't spoken about the attic in years. Not since they had accidentally discovered an old trunk filled with photographs and journals nobody else was supposed to see. Only Eleanor had known about it. The family started panicking. How was this happening? Phones were in different cities, messages arriving even when no one could have forwarded them. They called the police, checked numbers, and traced the messages, but each time it led nowhere. One evening, Anna's phone rang. Not a voicemail this time. A live call. The ringtone was Eleanor's favorite song. Heart pounding, Anna answered. "Anna?" the voice breathed. "Grandma?" she whispered. There was a pause, heavy, almost unbearable. Then Eleanor said something Anna never expected. "I see you, hiding upstairs. Don't lie to me." Anna dropped the phone. Her bedroom door across the hall creaked open slowly. She lived alone. She called David immediately. He didn't answer. Then his phone rang. It was the same number. She answered, trembling, and the line was filled with static. A whisper emerged, chillingly familiar. "You should never have opened the trunk." The trunk. Anna realized it wasn't the cabinet this time. They had never moved the old trunk from the attic. They had forgotten it existed. That night she couldn't sleep. Every time her phone buzzed, she flinched. Each call revealed more, each message uncovering family memories and secrets that should have stayed buried. She tried blocking the number, changing phones, even leaving the city, but the calls never stopped. Days later, David was found wandering outside the house. His eyes were wide, vacant. He whispered something incoherent but kept repeating one word over and over. She's here." Anna returned home. Every light was off. The air felt colder than it should have. She climbed the stairs to the attic. The trunk was open. Inside, the letters and photographs were spread in a meticulous circle, and her grandmother's voice echoed faintly, almost inside her head. "You shouldn't have come." Anna backed away. Her phone rang again. She didn't answer. The caller ID simply read, "Home." The next day the trunk was gone. So was the attic door. Even when she showed the house to her parents, it was as if it had never existed. Yet the calls continued. Every night, Eleanor's voice whispered, always urgent, always closer than the last. "You remember? You promised? Don't forget me." Anna never knew what her grandmother wanted, or why the messages kept coming, but she knew one thing. Some things in life never truly leave. And some deaths are only the beginning of a story you can't escape. The calls never stopped. The story of what happened to Harold, the cemetery night guard, has been passed around quietly for years, mostly whispered among other guards and locals. No one who's heard it ever forgets it. It begins on a quiet, unassuming Tuesday. Harold had been hired to work the night shift at the old Oakwood Cemetery, an expansive graveyard that stretched beyond the edges of town, with cracked pathways, leaning headstones, and the occasional stray fox wandering between the graves. Harold wasn't superstitious. He'd worked graveyards before, liked the solitude, and thought it was good, steady pay. He would make his rounds, check the gates, shine his flashlight over the tombstones, and record anything unusual in the logbook. That was his routine. The first night was uneventful. Harold walked the rows of graves under the cold glow of his flashlight, the silence punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic from the nearby highway. The air was crisp, and he half expected the eerie feeling people always described about graveyards at night, but it didn't come. He locked the gates at midnight, noted the weather in his logbook, and went home. It was on the second morning that something strange caught his attention. One of the graves, a freshly dug one near the far corner of the cemetery, looked off. Not because it had been dug recently, that part made sense, but because the mound of dirt was slightly shifted, uneven, as though someone had been walking around it. Harold knew the caretaker had filled it properly the day before. He checked for footprints. None. Not a single shoe print in the soft dirt. He shrugged it off. Maybe a raccoon or a stray dog, he thought. The second night he made a mental note to check that same grave closely. He walked past it, flashlight beam gliding over the marble headstone. Nothing unusual. No shadows. No movement. He laughed to himself. "You're losing it, Harold," he muttered. The third morning changed everything. He arrived at his post, coffee in hand, ready to start the day. His stomach sank as he saw the grave again. The dirt had been turned over completely, again. Still no footprints. No tools. Nothing. And this time something else was different. There were small depressions, like someone, or something, had knelt or crouched around the edges. Harold called the cemetery supervisor. "Hey, you need to check this out," he said. "The grave, it's been disturbed again." "Probably kids messing around," the supervisor replied. "We'll send someone during the day. Don't worry about it." Harold didn't feel reassured. That night he tried to shake it off, but the thought gnawed at him. He started walking the perimeter more slowly, flashlight scanning every corner. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint sound of leaves rustling, or was it footsteps? He couldn't tell. Every shadow seemed to twitch when he looked at it, every tree branch bending like a hand reaching out. By the third night he had begun feeling watched. He told himself it was the stress, the loneliness, the natural anxiety of working nights alone. But then, something impossible happened. As he rounded the far corner, the same grave came into view. He froze. The mound of dirt was perfectly smooth, freshly packed, but there was a faint shimmer, almost like wet soil catching the light. Harold stepped closer, heart hammering. And then he saw it, a handprint pressed deep into the dirt. Not a glove, not muddy boots. Bare skin. Harold stumbled back, tripping over the uneven pathway. The air felt heavier, as if something in the darkness was pressing down on him. He backed away toward the gate, flashlight shaking in his grip, and then he heard it, a faint whisper. "Get out." He spun around. Nothing. The grave was empty. He forced himself to laugh nervously. "Okay, Harold. Just the wind. You're fine. Go home." But the whisper came again, closer this time, unmistakable. "Go." Harold dropped his flashlight. It spun on the ground, casting long, frantic shadows. He ran. He didn't stop until he reached the main road, panting, his coat soaked in sweat despite the chill. The next morning, the supervisor arrived at the cemetery and found the grave exactly the same as before, disturbed again. Harold never returned. He quit immediately, leaving the rest of the night shifts to others who whispered about the haunted corner, but never dared stay for more than one night. Months later, someone finally looked closer at the cemetery records. That grave, on the far corner, was for a man who had been buried decades ago. But the name on the tombstone, it wasn't his. It belonged to a child who had died in the 1920s. The logbooks confirmed it. Harold's reports matched the days exactly, But there were no workers assigned to that area, no recent burials, no maintenance scheduled. Some say Harold quit because he feared he might see whatever had returned to that grave that night. Others say he ran because he realized the grave wasn't just disturbed, it was calling him. And if you ever visit Oakwood Cemetery after dark, some people swear you can still hear the whispering, soft and urgent, coming from that far corner. Go. And just like Harold, most who hear it never stay to find out who or what answers back. It started as a simple school project. 4 friends had been assigned to record an audio project for their media class. Something creative, something that would make their teacher notice. They chose a format that felt easy, a casual roundtable discussion, each of them talking about their fears, their childhood memories, and small, personal experiences. The goal was nothing more than to capture authentic conversation. The group gathered in Max's basement. It was cramped, filled with the usual clutter of old board games and half-empty soda cans, but the acoustics were decent enough for a clear recording. They sat in a circle, microphones in front of them, and pressed record. At first, the conversation was ordinary, laughs, teasing each other, recalling minor embarrassments and awkward moments. But after about 20 minutes, Max suggested they try something different. "Let's ask each other questions," he said. "You know, like a spooky version. We each take turns asking a question, and whoever answers first wins a point." It was silly, but everyone agreed. They started with harmless questions. Favorite scary movie, biggest fear, who would survive a zombie apocalypse. And then it escalated naturally, questions about each other's secrets, embarrassing stories, and past mistakes. Everything seemed normal until Ava asked a question that made everyone pause. "Okay, what's something bad that's going to happen to one of us this week?" she asked, half jokingly, half seriously. There was laughter at first. They all stared at each other, waiting for someone to answer. That's when it happened. On the recording, a voice answered. It was faint, distant, and calm, but unmistakably there. "Ryan," it said. They froze. Ryan, one of their group, blinked. "What?" The others leaned in to check the microphones. The playback was clean, just the 4 of them sitting in the basement. But when they listened carefully, the voice was there again, responding directly to the question. Not one of their voices. Not one of their friends. A 5th presence, soft and deliberate, saying things they hadn't spoken aloud. "What are you talking about?" Max asked nervously. The voice answered again. This time it was clearer, almost whispering. "Ryan will trip on the stairs tomorrow and break his wrist." Everyone laughed nervously, thinking it was someone messing with them. Ryan even shrugged. Yeah. Funny. The next day, Ryan tripped on the stairs at his own house. His wrist snapped against the banister. He was rushed to the hospital. The voice from the recording wasn't a coincidence. They all knew it. Still shaken, they met again the following week, trying to understand what was happening. Ava played the recording over and over, isolating the voice. Each time, it predicted something small but precise. Who would spill coffee, who would argue with a parent, which traffic light would turn red just as someone drove through it. Things that could happen by chance, but the accuracy was impossible. By the 3rd week, fear had taken hold. The predictions escalated. "You're going to lose something important tonight," the voice said. It was Max's turn on the recording. And that night, his phone, wallet, and keys vanished from his backpack, never to be found. The friends grew frantic. They didn't know what to do. They tried to destroy the recording, erase the files, smash the equipment, but each time the voice somehow returned. A copy always appeared on someone's phone, laptop, or even in email drafts they hadn't written. And then the final recording happened. It was late. They were desperate, huddled in Ryan's living room, recording one last test, hoping to understand the phenomenon. They asked the voice a final question. "Who are you?" The reply was immediate. Clear. "I was here all along." The lights flickered. The room grew cold. And then the voice spoke again, naming each of them, not with their real names, but with a detail only a stranger could know. The middle name they never shared. The first pet from childhood. The exact moment each of them had lied to a teacher. Every intimate, hidden detail they thought was private. They listened in terror as the voice predicted one last thing. Tomorrow Ava will not wake up. The next morning she didn't. There was no note, no explanation, nothing at all. She was simply gone. Her bed was made, her alarm clock still blinking, her door locked from the inside. The other three were left staring at each other, clutching the recording, unable to explain what they had brought into their lives, or who, or what, had been speaking to them all along. To this day the recording exists. It waits. And anyone who plays it, hears the last voice, answering questions that shouldn't have been asked, predicting events with precision no one can explain. No one knows where it came from. No one knows why. But the warning is clear. Some voices aren't meant to be heard. And some questions are never meant to be asked.